I am now going to introduce our two panelists, and I will need my notes for this because they have very impressive biographies. So I'm going to start with John Morton, who is a graduate of the then DIT Conservatory, now TU Dublin Conservatoire, BA in Drama Performance. John is an actor, writer, and filmmaker. He is the creator and writer of the TV series Dead Still, which premieres in Ireland this autumn. For the screen, he's written and directed the short films Two Cats, Daphne Malloy and Other Catastrophes, Hot Water Bottle, and Smitten for RTE Storyland. Other short films he's written include Shawnee and Flo, Kathleen, and Swerve. For the stage, he's written the plays Taboo for White Label, War of Attrition, Scratcher, Smitten, and Heart-Shaped Vinyl for Devious Theatre. With Peter McGann, he co-wrote the Irish historical plays The Hellfire Squad and The Roaring Banshees. He also wrote the adaptation of Thomas Kilroy's novel The Big Chapel, Asylum Abbey Theatre Kilkenny Arts Festival, which was nominated in 3 categories at this year's Irish Times Theatre Awards. Work for radio includes 100 Everyday Menaces for RTE Drama on One, an IMRO Award winner for 2018, the serial Vultures for KCLR Devious Theatre, and an adaptation of The War of the Worlds for KCLR Devious Theatre, which was the PPI Award winner for 2009. And he is a founding member of Devious Theatre in Kilkenny and White Label in Dublin. Our second panellist, Aonghus Óg MacNally, is a graduate of the Samuel Beckett Centre, Trinity College Dublin, and also trained with Anne Bogart's City Company in New York. He has worked extensively across stage and screen and radio for over 20 years. He is the artistic director of Rise Productions, whose debut show, Fight Night by Gavin Costick, earned Aonghus the Best Actor Award at Dublin Fringe Festival and also won the Bewley's Little Gem Award. It was nominated Best New Play in the Irish Times Theatre Awards and adapted as a radio play for RTE. The games People Play won Best New Play at the Irish Times Theatre Awards, and At the Ford completed this trilogy. Aonghus's directing credits include Weekend Warrior by Tony Doyle for the Dublin Fringe and on national tour, Kicking All the Boxes by Liz Fitzgibbon, Dublin Fringe, Vault Festival, London, music theatre piece Celebrating Christie, Bord Gosh Theatre and national tour, the site-specific Tear Down the Walls for Dublin Theatre Festival, and Cobra's Quest and Christian O'Reilly's The Good Father. Elsewhere, he has directed Mad Forest by Carol Churchill, Normal by Katrina Daly, and Murder of Crows by Lee Coffey for American College Dublin. A Picture of Us, a sort of musical for the Cup Theatre Company, Changed for Gumption Theatre Company, The Greatest Show on Earth and Displayed for the Gate School of Acting, and both Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth as part of Text Messages. Whew. So as I catch my breath from reading those bios, I'm going to ask Aonghus Óg MacNally and John Morton to turn on their cameras and their microphones, and we will get this panel started. Hi, John.
Hey.
Excellent. And there's Aonghus. Wonderful. Welcome, guys. For anyone who wants to see them in the magnificent big screen, I recommend the speaker view. But if you want to enjoy the kind of mosaic effect of seeing all the black squares in their faces, you can also choose the gallery view. All right. So I'm going to start with a question that we asked at our first of these webinars at the panel, because for many of our students who are going to graduate this year or next year, it's the line between I am a student and I am a professional working theatre maker seems impossibly vast. So in order to demystify that a bit, John, we'll start with you. Can you tell us, what was your first year of working professionally post-drama school like?
To be honest, it was like, I wasn't in a position, unfortunately, where like there was, immediately jobs jumping off the table and, I had all these offers from agents. I didn't really, so I just ended up, I figured what was best for me at that point was to put what I learned into practice, and to ideally do it in an environment where you can kind of make a lot of mistakes and get better, and ideally not have a lot of people kind of watching those mistakes. So what I did was I went back to Kilkenny for a year, and I ended up getting just like a regular record store job at the time. And then I spent my spare time working in the youth theatre that I had kind of come through in Kilkenny. And I'd written a play for them, and I did a little bit of acting, despite the fact that at that stage, at 22, I was probably way too old to be acting in youth theatre. But it was good to.
State of mind.
It was a state of mind, yeah. And I directed a play then that year for the youth theatre. We did the Colleen Bawn by Dion Boucicault, which was a very, very fun play to direct in a youth theatre context, and very inventive. So I used that opportunity, really taking a year out. I was applying for a postgrad as well, and I was just trying to find ways that I could apply the skills that I learned in kind of in a smaller way. And it was particularly beneficial being able to engage with the youth theatre, because even though you feel quite fresh and quite new yourself because you're just out of college, the experience that you've built up over your 3 or 4 years or whatever it may be is still hugely beneficial to actors who are 5 years younger than you, who are still, maybe in 5th year or 6th year. And, that can't be understated. So as much as I felt like I was, a small goat let loose on a mountain in terms of the professional sphere, like there was stuff that I could still get back, and I could reinforce the skills that I learned and apply them in different ways. So for me, it was a year of just trying to get that stuff together. And then by the end of it, we kind of set up Devious Theatre, because I think we had just sufficient confidence at that point to make some shows, and at least to try out and see if we could make some shows anyway.
Okay, so right from the start, you were kind of living. Actually, somebody reminded me that before I started interviewing you guys, I should probably explain what I meant by portfolio career, which is exactly what you've just described, which is that because working in the arts rarely involves like, this is your job, you will be doing this 9 to 5 each day, there will be a steady salary. Quite often it's one gig working on a show as an actor, another kind of unpaid writing gig, hopefully leading towards a production, what my friend calls survival work, which is the kind of the paying job that pays the bills but can be flexible enough to allow for creative things. So right from the start, you were kind of building that portfolio, even if you weren't consciously thinking of it that way.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, like, I was taken in a very loose way as like an off year as well. So particularly after 3 years of college and going straight in from secondary school, I just felt that and like also, like coming straight out of college in being in Dublin, as I said, like, I mean, I think it would have been different maybe if there was a lot of opportunities being presented to me, but they weren't at the time. So it was a little bit of recalibration. And then you get to the point where you realize that, yeah, like if you want to start getting credits on your CV and you want to start making things happen, you're going to have to do it yourself in some way. Because particularly at the age of 21, 22, you can't depend on that phone, ringing all the time, and you certainly don't want to sit around and wait for it. So I felt like I made good use out of the time, but it still felt like it was a bit of an off year, and was able to kind of just play around with what I learned for the previous 3 years.
Okay, that sounds like a good use of time. Aonghus, I'm going to ask you the exact same question, and I think it's going to be an interestingly contrasting answer. What was your first year of working professionally post drama school like?
Yeah, my experience was slightly different in that from the day of our kind of big audition showcase graduating, I did get the shiny agent on day one, and I was under contract before we even formally left drama school. And for the first 18 months solid, I was under contract the entire time, just going from gig to gig to gig, movie to TV to plays and whatever else. And so I'm clearly swanning around going, clearly I'm the greatest actor of all time. This will last forever and I'll be a millionaire in no time. And I remember the point, like 18 months deep, where I was having a conversation with my agent about a TV gig I was doing down in Galway. They wanted me to come back for a second series and we couldn't get the financial deal sorted out. And so in the end, I just said, oh, come on, let's just turn them down. What's the worst that can happen? It's not like I'm not going to have any work. Tumbleweed for 6 solid months after that, just sitting on my ass doing nothing. So, the whole kind of pride comes before a fall thing, I think, is very real. But I think it was a useful learning curve for me as well. Like, obviously, it was a beautiful thing to have that dream start and to start clocking with the experience that John's talking about, kind of that thing of learning on the job as kind of applying the theory that you've picked up over the 3 years of training. That learning on the job stuff is absolutely vital and crucial and really, really necessary and rewarding. So it's kind of baptism of fire for me there, and a nice mix of theatre and film and TV that you'd want to get at the base. But then 18 months later, you're back to square one going like, well, where's the next job coming from and how do I pay the rent this week? So it's always the way.
Yeah, so it's fascinating that, probably youthful, dewy-eyed Aonghus, straight out from drama school, thought this is what the career is like.
Precisely.
And then you got a taste of what the career is like.
Yeah, and it's weird because I grew up in a theatrical family. I'm kind of the third generation of my family to do this. And so one would have hoped that I would have a little bit more perspective or realism. Not so much. Again, just being fully convinced that I was clearly the reincarnation of Brando or the best thing since De Niro or something. And that it would last forever. But I think it's no harm in the same way that I think good theatre training breaks you down a little bit and then builds you back up again. I think having the corners knocked off yourself a bit early days in the career is no harm either, to get a sense of what the reality of this is. Because if you think that you want to be an actor and you're going to have a career as an actor and it's going to be all red carpets and, I don't know, drinking champagne with Nicki Minaj, I don't know, give me a cultural reference that'll make sense there, I don't know. But I know that's all I could reach for. It ain't going to be that. It ain't going to be that. There are moments of that, and they're the great high points. But know that it is comprised of highs and lows. There's times when it's brilliant and you're going job to job, and there's times when you really are sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. Unless, of course, you do as John says, and get up off your ass and make it happen for yourself, which is feasible and I think necessary.
And that actually leads nicely to my next question. So, Aonghus, when and why did you decide to start producing and creating your own work or work for yourself?
Yeah, so I had always presumed that I would have my own production company. As I said, my whole family were in the business. So my grandparents had their production company, my parents had their production company. So I just presumed that was what one did. And so even before I left drama school, I was always talking about the idea of having my own company and producing my own work. The real light bulb moment for me was I was working on another show, and I started to get a bit obnoxious in the rehearsal room. I started to kind of concern myself with stuff that wasn't my concern. And rather than just focusing on my own performance and doing the job, I started worrying about design stuff and directing stuff. And you can make yourself very unwelcome very quickly if you allow yourself fall down that route. Mercifully, I clocked it in myself and managed to knock it on the head. But I went, okay, right, clearly this impulse inside me to create my own stuff is too strong to ignore anymore. I have to go and pursue it. So I would have graduated 2002. This would have been about 2008. So about 5 or 6 years deep into the career, kind of going, okay, it's not enough to just be a gun for hire anymore. I want to go and make the stuff I want to make. And so that was 2008. I kind of set the wheels in motion in 2009, and 2010 would have been the first production from Rise. And partly it was about just generating opportunities for work for myself and additional paychecks and additional roles that you want to be playing. But I think a bigger, more overarching thing of it was the latent director in me knew I wanted to craft and tell stories, that it wasn't always about me being center stage and having that moment. I had a much broader understanding of maybe, or desire for, shaping the overall theatrical experience for the audience on the night. And so I knew that to access that, and I knew I wanted to access that, and that to access that, I would need to be creating my own work in that way. And that's where it came about, and we all kicked off in 2010.
I'll come to John on this one in a second, but I want to follow on that idea of 2010, because I know that Rise Productions arrived with a production with Fight Night, which was an excellent vehicle for you. But that wasn't all Rise Productions arrived on the scene with, was it?
No, it wasn't. I learned from it. So Fight Night was the first show. It was the first show in a bag from the Fringe and the Irish Theatre Institute and Fishamble Theatre Company, which has now kind of evolved into duets. But it was brilliantly, it was very successful for us straight at the gate. We won a lot of awards, as you mentioned early on. We kind of toured extensively. And so I presumed, again, back to that brilliant confidence, I've made a hit show. Now the Arts Council will give me $250,000 every year for the next 5 years. Weirdly, that's not what happens. So, I mean, I was quite shocked. So, okay, I was caught in the infamous catch-22, where you then say, right, you can't get funding until you have a track record for making work, but you can't create the track record without the funding. So what do you do? And what I decided to do was to start this theatre podcast, the Rise Productions Irish Theatre Podcast, which both Dr. Tanya and Mr. John Morton have both been guests at this stage. And And what that was about was, yeah, it was a great resource for the Irish theatre industry. It is a lovely archive of theatrical voices and kind of people's journey into the business and why they do what they do. But apart from anything else, I was aware that it was an hour-long infomercial for Rise and me, going into very influential ears every week. And it was about, I guess it was about as much establishing a brand per se as it was anything else, because it was that thing of trying to create Rise as an entity, as a player on the scene, so that then when it did come time for trying to access funding, that we would be able to do it.
Excellent. And I'm going to switch now to your former interviewee. John, when you were talking about your first year post drama school, you hinted that this was what led towards Devious Theatre being founded. But can you tell us a bit about like when and why did you decide that you wanted a company and that you wanted to have other strings to your bow as well as actor?
The short answer is I actually didn't really want to have other strings to my bow apart from actor. It was a very long and roundabout way of being an actor, I suppose. So like a couple of us founded it. We were all, at similar stages. We all come from youth theatre together. So, and we saw kind of a gap, particularly like the company is based in Kilkenny, and we were from Kilkenny, and we saw a gap there because we had a big audience in youth theatre, and we thought, actually, if we start making original work, maybe they'll follow us. And we were still very hungry and very passionate about theatre. So, and then we saw it as an opportunity that people would have, the people within the company, whether they be actors or designers, directors, writers, that it would prove to be a vehicle for the work, that if we built a ship that was pretty solid, a few people could sail in it, and that would help people move forward in their own professional careers. And that was kind of the main function, and that's kind of what it did really. But that was the initial urge. And for me, it was a case of just trying to have, like I said earlier, I didn't want to wait for the phone to ring necessarily, and the phone was resolutely not ringing. So it was important, I think, to be able to, create some shows that could showcase you as an actor, and then subsequently being a writer kind of sprung out of that then as well.
Okay, so it very much came from, a lot of actors say that one of the hardest things about the job is this feeling that you don't have much control over your own platforms, of your own career trajectory. It's yes or no, but you don't get to really design much beyond that. So it sounds like setting up a company was both creating that platform, but also perhaps giving yourself a bit of autonomy about, well, what stories do I want to be a part of telling?
Yeah, that was a really big part of it. And I know, like, it kind of sounds quite grandiose when you look at it, but and like it is, I think it just feeds into that general kind of actor, particularly actor, but that actor ego instinct. But I had this fear coming out of college. I was like, I knew I was always going to be an actor, and no matter what, I was pretty much going to stick with it, no matter what way I do it. But it was a very honest artistic intention, which was like, I don't want to go through my entire 20s looking at all the good parts that you can play in your 20s, and then spend my 20s waiting around and end up in like spear carrier number 3 in something, and that's as good as my CV is going to get for that period of my life. So there was a little bit of like, the control came from a little bit of fear of going, no, like I want to, if I look back on my 20s as an actor, or even as a writer, I want to be able to look back on it and go, there's a couple of good parts there. There's a couple of good parts there that I did at that time that were unique to that time and that place. And similarly with some of the stories and the works that we're creating, that I think as an artist, you can look back on a particular period of your life and, be quite proud of the work that you did. So there was definitely an instinct and a strong urge to do that, and that kind of that sparked a lot of the stuff that we ended up doing.
That's fascinating. But for both of you, it was kind of like, it was not just, I want to get out of where I am right now. It was, I want to look back and say, I did that, I made that, I'm proud of that. Yeah,
I think pretty much. Yeah, I did have to fear, because like you said, if you don't have that control, and it can be particularly pertinent with actors, if you don't have that control, and you can see years going by where you're just waiting for somebody else to give you a chance. But I think if you gamble on yourself a little bit, and gamble on the people around you, the people that you enjoy working with, and collaborators that you might have access to. I think that's where you can really make some interesting stuff, and particularly stuff that you can stand by and can maybe help, propel you forward a little bit.
And with your work with White Label and with Devious, and Aonghus' work with Rise, you're both now at the point where you're, I don't even know, it's triple threats. I think it's like, octuple threats. You're both actors. I think you've both directed, if I'm not mistaken. John, you've written for stage and for screen. Aonghus, you've had a very successful podcast with incredibly attractive and witty guests. And both of you, I think, by absolute default necessity of the portfolio career, have also become producers. So you've got an incredible CV in terms of skill sets. One thing I'd love to ask you guys is, and I will say for the audience, I did ask them if I could ask this before, I'm not just springing it on them. Aonghus, I might start with you. Can you demystify the portfolio career, or even the creative career for us? How do you make a living in a portfolio career? What might an average year of employment consist of, including all the creative gigs that you love doing and all the things you do to pay the rent alongside them and all the unpaid creative labor in between?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Obviously, the quickest answer is there is no average year. You don't know what it's going to be. Sometimes you have years where you might do, I've had years where I did 5 or 7 months straight at the Abbey, or years where I'm juggling a play and a movie and a TV thing at the same time and turning down other stuff. I've also had years of total tumbleweed. So it is up and down. For me, it's about hoping that you have that you've kind of created a momentum around yourself a bit, that you have a diverse enough set of skills that you can find a way to make it work. So for me, an average year will probably have me performing as freelance actor gun for hire in someone else's show. It'll probably have a couple of radio plays in there. It'll have me probably producing a show for Rise that I may or may not be in, that will more than likely tour extensively around Ireland. And then then getting to the absolute nub of the issue, how do I then, do the shopping and duns and pay the rent, is I would do a significant amount of voiceover work for radio and TV commercials, which is very lucrative. And also, like a Jane Austen character, I married well. And so my wife's a primary school teacher. And so you get the best, to some extent, you get the best of both worlds, where you get the steady, reliable, dependable paycheck that comes in every fortnight from the Department of Education on her side. And then on my side, sure, there might be 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks where there's not a paycheck coming in, but then a large paycheck will come in, or more often than not, a medium or small paycheck will come in. And the hope is that it balances out over the year. And at this stage, I'm doing it long enough that I have found a way to make it work. But it's about an open-mindedness. I think there's no harm walking out of drama school going, no, I'm classically trained. I'm exclusively a theatre actor. That's all I'm interested in. And if that's your deal, cool. Okay. I think you're going to struggle. Because just the nature of what a freelance career is, not every gig is going to finish on a Saturday night and rehearsals for the next one start on a Monday morning. You're going to have those gaps. And even if you did work 52 weeks of the year on a theatre wage, even the most generous theatre wage in the country, you're not driving a Porsche. You're not taking 3 skiing trips. So there would need to be a degree of reality around that. And also, I just think the career is more interesting if it's 3 days on a movie this week, a radio play next week, developing a new piece that you're looking to produce for the following year, and kind of teasing out the nuts and bolts of a piece of new writing or something the following week. And then the next week you're in the Abbey rehearsal room or whatever. I like the diversity of that. I like the excitement of that. I would love a more steady paycheck, sure. But like I say, it's a career with highs and lows. And for me, 23 years deep at this stage, the good points still outweigh the bad, Thank
you so much. John, same question for you. With the understanding that average is in giant quotation marks, what does an average year of a portfolio career like? What strands are you pulling together to make sure that you can be creatively fed as well as literally fed?
Yeah, mine actually, to be honest, it wouldn't be too dissimilar from Angus's there, although I don't do voiceovers, so I'd sub that out with screenwriting, which I've been lucky enough to do for a couple of years, and that kind of, that's, you know, where most of the groceries get bought. And then also, like, particularly in my 20s, I was very, very lucky coming out of graduating from Rathmines. I was so glad that I could teach drama, and I was so glad that I was able to. I came from a very strong youth theatre and youth filmmaking background anyway, which really helped. But I think if you can teach and you've got if you've got a flair for it and you're good at it and something you enjoy, that's something that can really carry you through. So it was always a mix between those things. There was no jobs that I was really turning down. Like I did have that thing. Like I talked about my first year out, but like my second and third year of acting, like we set up the company, and I graduated in 2005. We set up the company in 2006, and then but throughout late 2006, 2007, 2008, I was working constantly as an actor, and then I'd kind of, you know, I'd have 2 or 3 months off in a year maybe, and then that was the time where we would put on a DV theatre show, just to kind of scratch that creative itch. And then when it came to, and then once I hit like late 2008, it was, so I wasn't actually dissimilar to Aonghus in that way, where I was like, this is what it's going to be like, you know. I took my year out, and now I'm working all the time. And then all of a sudden it was gone, and it stayed gone for a while. So within that, I was glad of the things I could do, like teaching, like writing, and then also from a filmmaking perspective, like doing little corporate things. And a big part of it, being honest as well, is that, you know, like the dole, you sometimes just got to be on the dole for a while. And particularly if you can find a part-time job, you know, if you kind of find a part-time job that facilitates your career, like that is, you know, that can be necessary at times. Like there was when I moved back up to Dublin, which was right in the middle of the recession, there was a good 2 years where I felt I was kind of like, I was on stabilizers in terms of like setting my career up in Dublin again a little bit, and kind of, you know, getting used to making theatre here and film as well. But those first couple of years, like, you know, there was times where you'd be very dependent on the dole in order to make it happen and to survive, and you just take work really wherever you can. And we didn't get, and also a big thing actually within that as well, just to say, is that, you know, if you are quite studious about the things you can apply for, the various schemes and supports, and whether it's, you know, local authority bursaries or grants and things like that, that stuff is really, really useful as well in terms of keeping you going. So a little bit of that too. So altogether, I cobbled it, you know, I cobbled together to a point where it was sustainable, and you kind of work like that until you can get off the stabilizers and be, you know, sustainable on your own and a lot more comfortable.
I think it's fascinating that both of you kind of talked about directly and indirectly programs and schemes that are designed to support art and artists, and how you kind of went for them. And I think that's quite often, for somebody who's trained as an actor, that's not a skill you're told to hone, because all the training is about waiting for opportunity, as opposed to where is there funding that I'm eligible for. So can you, you don't have to reveal all your secrets, but can you tell us some examples of those kind of funding schemes that you went for that supported you?
Well, one thing that's probably that I should point out, which is a cold hard fact that I think is crucial in the understanding of this. I have made maybe about 30 shows theatre-wise altogether, about 30 shows since 2006, and that was from when I was like 23. I'm 37 now. I have never ever made a show with funding. So 14 years on, that has not changed. My career in terms of theatre making and theatre production is genuinely not that much different than it was when I started out. And that was a long, hard journey in terms of coming full circle with that. So I can't say that it's exceptionally easy to get Arts Council funding and that you can always be dependent on it to make a show. You're usually just cobbling funding from different sources. But what there is there's a lot of resources that support people on their own. That, you know, one bursary I used to get was the Art Links bursary, which was a 6-county bursary that was centred around like Kilkenny, Carlow, Waterford, and that within that bursary, that would give you, you know, maybe 2 months or 3 months to afford you where you could sit down and write and develop a show, and pay you throughout that. There's certainly, from what I can see, there's certainly less now than there had been. Like, there used to be some great like film-based bursaries and you know, local authority film bursaries then as well in terms of writing and developing work. But it's always worth searching that stuff out and using it to kind of fill those gaps wherever you can. But when it comes to actually, you know, the magic codes for how to access lots of funding, I am absolutely the last person to be asking.
I think there's a lot of us who'd like to find those magic codes.
Yeah.
Aonghus, for you, you talked about the fact that you worked in the Show in a Bag initiative, which was designed to kind of give actors vehicles that were either, vehicles a horrible word for it, plays that were either one-person shows or smaller two-handers that they either wrote themselves or that were developed on their behalf by Fishamble. So that was kind of your, for Rise anyway, I think that was your first kind of support structure that you were able to apply for and get. Can you talk a bit about that and about any other kind of, and you've already talked about the fact that like you'd also like to find the magic codes for the Arts Council.
Yeah, I would. I mean, to echo John's thing, you know, you look at Rise Productions, you look at the, you know, a whole heap of awards won, international touring, you know, big critical success. You know, the idea that in the space of, you know, half a dozen years, we went from playing to 50 people in Bewley's to 2,000 people in the Bord Gáis. And having said all that, for all the 77-date nationwide tours of critically acclaimed 5-star shows, in the 10 years Rise is going, we've had one show that had Arts Council funding. Mm-hmm. You know, so that is the reality of just the landscape of the last decade, because of the choices in terms of what investment and funding was put into the arts, and obviously the knock-on implications for the Arts Council. But in terms of the Show in a Bag thing, I found was really interesting. I say the line I always use is most people set up a company to put on a play. I put on a play to set up a company. So I wanted to make Rise happen. But I was like, there was shows I wanted to do that I was applying for the rights for. And, you know, literary agents just going, who are you and what have you done? I said, well, I'm nobody and I've done nothing. They went, well, then go away. We're not giving you our play. So it seemed to me that the Show in a Bag structure was like stabilizers on the bike that let me go, okay, here is Gavin Costick who will write the show for me. We'll have production support. We've got the advice from Irish Theatre Institute. You know, you've got the whole support network of the Fringe behind you. And it was a great way to ease in. But, you know, I'm a bit like John as well, that, you know, you do get, or I think you have to get adept at finding those sources of income, whether that's, you know, again, local authority bursaries that I've been looking to get, or Arts Council bursaries, or in some case, you know, in one case, a project award. But that's getting trickier and trickier, and it's going to be harder and harder over the next little while. But the one thing we'll say is, like, I know that not every actor graduating from a drama school is going to be a great writer or is going to have the aptitude to be a producer. And I also understand that it's kind of unfair that will be expected of you. It's kind of the reality for now. And so you need to kind of tune into the mechanisms for how you can go and make that stuff happen. A really interesting thing happened to me. I had a friend whose dad was in the property development multimillionaire thing. And him and all his multimillionaire developer mates all took out the famous SSIA saving schemes. Which seemed a bit weird because they were capped at the most you could put in monthly. And so the most you could take out, I think was in the region of like 25,000 quid, which is an awful lot of money. But when you talk about millionaires, it's a different thing. And this guy, my friend, said to his dad, he said, like, what are you going to do with that 25 grand? And his dad said, well, that'll be a great night out. And I went, okay, so that's the league you're playing in. But really tellingly, he said, well, why did you do it? Why did you and all your friends do it? And he said, because none of us got to where we are without knowing free money when we see it. And I don't think that Arts Council money is free money, because by Jesus, if you jump through hoops to get it, and it's your tax dollars that you paid in the first place just coming back to you. But I do think it is in everyone's interest You know, in the same way as it makes sense to keep yourself fit and flexible physically to be working, in the same way as it makes sense to do continuing, you know, professional development on voice workshops and yoga, I think it makes sense as a performer to stay literate and aware of what's going on in terms of support structures, financial and otherwise, because you know, it's a competitive enough game at the best of times. Why not stack the deck as much in your favor as possible? And if that means that you get a couple of grand in a bursary somewhere that buys you 6 months to really focus on you and your career, rather than worrying about dashing down to the bar to pull pints on a Thursday and Friday night so you don't have money to make the rent, then if that's the competitive edge you can get for yourself, then I think it's worth doing, because in the end, it's not just about getting competitive edge. It's about helping you make the work you want to make, which then makes the entire ecosystem of Irish theatre better, which makes us all better, and that rising tide lifts all boats.
Agreed. Footnoting your speech, just because I'm aware that we've got a kind of a wonderfully diverse audience watching these, of students who are about to graduate, prospective students, hang in there guys, and people working in the industry. Just to clarify a few of the terms that we've been bandying about very casually. So a bursary means a funding system where the successful applicant wins funds to support them in developing something. So for example, developing a workshop of a piece or a script. A project award from the Arts Council means it's for something that's going to production, that is public facing. Those are much rarer. Irish Theatre Institute that Aonghus mentioned is one of the great support agencies for Irish theatre. It's based in Temple Bar. Look up Irish Theatre Institute. They are wonderful. They have all kinds of initiatives to support artists. They offer advice on things like funding applications, budgets. They're wonderful. But this is, when you both talked about like being literate about what supports are there, this is the kind of thing that when you're starting out, you're not at all cognizant of, but the ability to kind of like ferret out that information can very quickly find you supports for your career that other people might never be aware of. Big broad question, because it means less work for me. Inga, we'll start with you. What are the advantages of this kind of portfolio approach to a career? And I suppose the challenges are fairly obvious, but what are the challenges?
The challenges are, of course, the inconsistency and not knowing where you're going to be from 1 week to the next. The other thing is, eventually there comes a point where you got to back yourself. You've got to start making decisions. So, for example, if I book a tour for Rise Productions for the middle of next year, that means that if the Abbey comes calling and says, "Look, we're doing Hamlet and we want you to play Hamlet," that's a phone call that's definitely on the way. You know, then you will have put yourself in the situation where you go, okay, I mean, the famous anecdote of if you're struggling to find work as an actor, just book a holiday, because the phone will invariably ring the next day, like every time, like without fail. The only time I've ever really blocked off was for my honeymoon, and I said, "Look, here's the deal. It's the honeymoon. We're doing it. Even if Spielberg rings, I'm doing the honeymoon. There's no question." Literally the next day, Spielberg rang. Like it's that crazy. No, in a roundabout way. He was like executive producing on the show that they were talking about, right? But you know, it does happen. So you got to back yourself. You got to go, right, okay, I'm going to dedicate this 3 months next year to doing this, or if it's about kind of developing a new piece, going, I'm actually going to spend, you know, give myself the time to spend developing that and focus exclusively on it. So you need to be a bit disciplined about it. And again, it's the same old thing. The inconsistency of the finances of it makes it tricky at times as well. But I do think having that many strings to your bow and having an understanding of those other disciplines really improves your game. Each complements the other in a particular way. So I think now that I've been directing as much as I have, I'm a very different actor when I'm on stage, because I was always quite focused around the show in its totality, rather than let me be a star, let me stand center stage. It was always about making the show be the best it could be. But having had more experience as a director and taking that more zoomed out overall view, I'm even more precise in how I approach my performances to try and create that overall experience. And I think that's useful. And also, you know, you talked about kind of the unpaid work that goes in. Like a lot of the times I have to do all of the jobs when we're on the road with Rise Productions. So sometimes I'm doing sound design, sometimes I'm doing set design, sometimes I'm doing set construction, lighting design, all these kind of things, which is less than ideal, because I'm not a lighting designer. I'm not a set designer. I shouldn't be doing it. I shouldn't be doing it for two reasons. One, because the quality of the work has to suffer by me doing an okay job versus an expert bringing their brilliant skill set to it. But secondly, because I have to do that out of necessity, because otherwise the show just couldn't happen, I'm taking that paycheck from someone else who should be earning it. I'm taking the food out of their mouths, and that shouldn't be happening, but it is. So with that caveat, the idea that I then get to do those things, that, you know, the more you learn about lighting design, the more you learn about how to use it yourself as a performer. There's a famous story about my granddad, Ray McAnally, approaching Stephen Ray, who we all know as Oscar nominee and very serious actor early in his career, and throwing, he used to get these fan-out lighting gel filters from like Lee, and he threw this, it has like, you know, maybe 400 or 500 different shades of every shade of the color of the rainbow of these lighting gels. Through that, Stephen Ray went, memorize those. On the basis that if you couldn't tell precisely that it was an 071 rather than a 323 shining down on you, that your performance would somehow suffer. Now, obviously, that's a crazy person, but there is something to it. The more understanding and appreciation you have of the entire machine around you, I think the better. It's like, you know, some people kind of feel that, you know, stage management are kind of lesser than the cast, or stage management aren't as important. You try doing a show without good stage management. Oh, like, you know, you learn that one very quickly.
Stage managers are the magnificent unsung ninja heroes of theatre, and they should have statues to them in front of every theatre.
Correct.
John, same question, and again, stupidly broad, but what are the advantages of this kind of multi-stringed portfolio career that you have, and what are the challenges?
The advantages are like Ingo said, you know, like you do get better, and having that variety between being able to, if you have that luxury where you're working on a film and then you're jumping to a play and then you're maybe writing something or directing something, the variety is wonderful. You're kind of enmeshed in all these different aspects of the profession, and I think you do get better, and it's so valuable, and particularly in your 20s, it's so valuable. Like Aonghus was saying, to learn that stuff, actually, like to know your way around, to know what everybody's job is, to where you maybe have to do some of those jobs, to know your way around a film set, to know your way around a rehearsal room and a stage. And a theatre, like it's very important, and I think that's a really good time to be kind of putting those strings on your bow. I think then the challenges based on that, and the flip side of that idea, is that you after a while, it's important that you really hone in on strings that you want on your bow. If there's a particular aspect that you find yourself doing out of necessity, it's important to know when to call time on that, because you know, you don't want to end up doing like 6 different things, and you kind of realize, well, actually, I just want to be an actor, or I just want to do maybe 2 of those things and not like the 6 of those things. And I certainly had to spend a little bit of time with that. I remember, like, when the first couple of years when I came back to Dublin after college, and it was those dole years, and it was hard finding work. It was in the recession, and after a while, I was starting to get offered a lot of theatre directing gigs, which I really enjoyed, and I love being in a rehearsal room. And I figured, well, like, I'm not getting in as an actor. This is going to be a good way to build experience, work with new people, and it was. But I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then I started to realise that I was slowly kind of getting known as being a theatre director. And I had to reconnect with, like, you know, the 13-year-old me who knew exactly what he wanted to be. And what he wanted to be was you know, an actor and a writer, and ideally do those things on stage and film if you can, and maybe make a film here or there. And I realized that for me, like, theatre direction, as much as I liked it and as much as it was paying me at a time when nothing else was, it wasn't part of the long-term plan. And if I was to stick with it, it was going to become a thing that I was going to get known for, maybe ahead of the things that I really, really wanted to be doing. So there's a lot of fluidity needed in that kind of way of thinking, because sometimes if you're going to put together a film for yourself, or you're going to put together a web series, or you're going to put together a show or a radio play, and you end up doing some of the jobs out of necessity, and then you find yourself maybe getting good at them, or enjoying them as well. You know, it is important keep an eye on that and make sure that after a while you're not getting known for the thing that you actually long-term don't want to be doing. Just keep on your toes in that regard, I would say.
I think that's a great measure. And actually that is a great question for both of you. I mean, in a traditional career, you know, you'll have several job interviews, but you'll eventually land in the job. And then as you go through, there's, you know, you might get a promotion, or you might move to a new position or a new company. There's a clear metric for what success looks like. Not necessarily what happiness looks like, but if we're in a more kind of hidebound career, there's a public understanding of what success looks like. Jonathan Shanky in one of our first webinars said, like, there isn't that for an actor's career anyway, because it's so all over the place. So given that you guys have taken such autonomy over your own careers and chosen this kind of beautiful kind of mosaic but challenging portfolio approach, how do you decide what success means to you in this career? John, Aonghus, you go first.
I think for me, you know, when you start out, the idea of success is, you know, anything short of Oscars is failure. And I think that's a really unhealthy approach. Fundamentally, I bring it back to the lads I grew up with, who all wanted to play for Man United or whatever at 15. And none of them ever did, for obvious reasons. I wanted to do this, and the idea that, you know, I'm pushing 40 now, have never had to have a real job, like, you know, that this is how I pay the bills. I get to kind of, like, I'm living the dream. I'm living the dream. You know, would it be cooler if I was flying first class to LA back and forth all the time to be in Star Wars or something? I don't know, maybe. But in terms of success, in terms of personal satisfaction, I'm getting to do what I always wanted to do. Like, if you told 15-year-old Aonghus, hey, guess what? You know, that thing you really want to do for the rest of your life, you will. I can't think of anything better than that, you know? And I don't think that's about settling for less than Oscars and, you know, kind of, you know, diminishing your hopes and dreams. I think it's about finding a sense of the reality. And why do you actually want to do this? Because if you only want to do this to be rich and famous, it's going to be a long, tough day at the office for you. Just the numbers aren't in your favor. Of course, it's totally possible. And you may well go and be Colin Farrell or Saoirse Ronan. Absolutely, you might. It's infinitely more likely that you won't. So why are you doing this? And for me, the collaboration, the storytelling, really, the communion with an audience, nothing feels better than that for me. Nothing makes me feel more fulfilled. And I don't think there's another way that I can contribute better to the world than providing those experiences for people. So if it's something I really enjoy, if it's something I happen to be good at, and if it's something that other people find useful and valuable and worthwhile, that to me is success, I guess. And if you can pay the bills and have a holiday once every few years or whatever, or sometimes treat yourself to, I don't know, Ben and Jerry's ice cream, then maybe it's okay.
Living big, Aonghus, living big.
Huge dreams.
Two scoops. John, how about you? How do you kind of, what is the measure of success you want to set for yourself for now and for the future?
To be honest, it is the exact same. It is the exact same answer. Like, there's no greater joy, I think, than being able to have that conversation in your head with your, like, you know, whatever, your 13-year-old self or your 14-year-old self, and say, I'm doing the thing that you wanted to do. And that's always a delicate negotiation as you're going through years where you're not entirely sure you're going to do it. And I remember I got to this point in, like, my late 20s where I was like stuff wasn't really going well and stuff hadn't been kind of moving for me. And I was kind of going, I'm literally living a life that a 13-year-old decided was a good idea for me. And I've stuck with that. And now I'm 28 and unemployed and I don't know what to do. And so that was an interesting dialogue to have. And I think, like, the kernel of it always came back to, like, okay, well, actually, what's it going to look like when I'm like 70? And I always said, as an actor, to be honest, I'd still stick by it. I always thought, like, you know, when I'm, at the very least as an actor, when I'm in my 70s, I'm going to be the guy in the local Amdram society who's going to be absolutely delighted to be doing the big classic plays. I'll do Amdram, Dead of a Salesman, and I'll be over the moon with it. So once I knew that was where the future trajectory was going to go at the very least, I got very comfortable in, taking the knocks of the industry as you do, and like Aonghus was saying, not being beholden to an idea that you're going to go and have a load of Oscars or you're going to be jetting around to film sets. But there's something just really, really nice and comforting in knowing that you've come good on, the basic principles of what you wanted to achieve when you decided to do it, that you can make a living, that you can support yourself, that you're creatively nourished by working on different projects with great people. And then I think once you learn to roll with the punches of that, I think, it's a hell of a life.
I so regret now that I didn't save this for the last question, because that'd be an amazing note to end on, but I'm terrible at this. So my next question for you guys is completely prosaic, and then we'll switch to Q&As and hopefully the students will redeem the line of questioning for me. John, for you, why, John Morton of Devious Theatre Company and White Label Productions, why set up a company, and how do you set up a company?
So the why of setting up a company was initially, as I said, it was the urge to kind of to platform our own talents, whether it be writing a play or having something to act in. And I think even now, like, anytime I go to see work in Seen and Heard and Smock, it's usually a lot of companies that are doing that, and that's the sole purpose. And that's actually fine. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to set up a company with the idea of it being a thing that you're going to have for the rest of your career. If that's a thing that you want to do, then absolutely do it. Like, I'd be quite different in that regard from Aonghus, because he seemed like he always wanted to have a company, and I didn't necessarily. And even the two companies that I work with now and that I've been part of setting up, like, we operate in quite different ways, and that really involved reframing our thinking about what we wanted from having theatre companies. And it's weird, like, it kind of came full circle, after even the way we run shows with Devious Theatre now, we pretty much make them like we did when we first started out. We will get together every so often, kind of like, a band coming together to jam and release an album and then do a small tour. We'll come together every so often. We'll do the table quiz fundraisers. We'll maybe do the funded campaign, or we'll do the small show that is going to raise some money for another show, or we'll do the comedy night, and we'll use that to cobble together the funds to do something that we really believe in. And in lieu of, like we were saying, the lack of been bestowed all these great bursaries by the Arts Council or whatever support you might not have, that's a way that I'm really comfortable making theatre, and it still achieves the same purpose. You're still showcasing talents, whether it be your own or whether it be other people's and other talents that you believe in and that you feel you can maybe give a little bit back with. So that the reasons for starting off making theatre are still pretty applicable now. We just kind of had to reframe how we did it, because it's an exceptionally hard industry to make it in and make it through, and there's not a lot of opportunities, and it is quite unforgiving in a lot of ways. But if you can find the joy, and like that was it for us, the joy of it was actually just making work with collaborators that you love and making work with your friends and enjoying doing it. And that was the central impetus for setting it up. Really, initially in the first year or two, it was just that. It's like-minded people getting together who want to build a platform for their own talents, and who know that there's possibly that's a really crucial thing, I think, is realizing that there's a audience out there for your work. I think maybe more often than not, like, some companies get set up that there isn't an audience for the work at all, and like, you don't know until you try. But I think it's very useful to know that even if you set up a company that's only going to put on maybe 2 years worth of plays, which happens quite a bit, that like when you do that, you're even if it's your mates and your mates of mates, that you're doing it in a way that makes it fun for you and makes it fun for an audience. So yeah, that would be my thinking around starting out.
Thank you so much. Aonghus, same broad question. Why set up a company, and how does one set up a company?
Because it's less embarrassing for the vanity publishing if the poster says Rise Productions rather than just Aonghus MacNally had to cast himself in this.
Also very true.
So it's a fig leaf more than no. There's an element of that. I think with it, what I don't have with Rise, which I would love to have, is that idea of the gang of mates coming together to bounce those ideas off. Rise is me, and I'd be a little bit of a control freak around some of this stuff, and that I don't really like delegating too much away. I like to have as much of a hand in shaping the audience experience of a show as is humanly possible. But I do wish I had more people around me to kind of bounce ideas off, to drag me out of my comfort zone a bit more, to challenge me a bit more. I think that'd be great. But also, like the reason I did it, I guess in kind of in practical terms, was you look at how the industry works, how it manifests itself. And certainly around the time that we would have set up Rise, it was just before they essentially exploded the entire company system. So there was a presumption that if you wanted to be out there and making work, you needed to have a company. And so that's kind of where it came from, that you would have this company structure, and that would be the way that you could eventually attract ongoing kind of stable funding from the Arts Council, which would then buy you the freedom to make the work you wanted to make. Obviously, the last decade did not go as we expected it to go. And, you know, the decision from successive governments to chronically underfund the arts sector has really taken its toll. And unfortunately, what that means is that an awful lot of people who should have made it didn't. An awful lot of people who should have stuck around didn't. An awful lot of people who had tremendous experience and kind of institutional knowledge went, because, you know, when you see how theatre people, and I don't just mean the artists, I mean the arts workers, the administrators, the managers, the tech people, their skill set, having for so long done so much with so little, made them invaluable in other places where they got the respect they deserved and the paychecks they deserved. And so we lose those people. And my terrible fear at the moment is that there is a risk of that happening again without visionary leadership from the next government. That we will need to be supported, not because we're beautiful artists and we deserve it, but because Ireland as a society deserves it. And I have to say, Ireland as an economy deserves it. The financial argument stacks up, it makes an awful lot of sense, but the kind of more holistic approach to us as a society makes sense too. And
how do you set up a company?
Oh, how? You write Rise Productions on a poster. Done. For me, there is no legal framework around Rise as such. You know, we're not a registered company. It's kind of me trading as Rise Productions, you know, and I hire people in and pay fees and commission scripts and rent the vans and build the sets and all that kind of stuff, whatever needs to be done. But it's not more formal than that. You know, if it was a situation where we were getting more significant funding from the Arts Council and you needed to be a registered company to get it, or as in many cases with theatre companies, a registered charity, you know, that would be there. But for the moment, the additional responsibilities that would bring in terms of financial reporting and governance and all that stuff, would the onerous nature of that would outweigh the benefits of me just kind of doing it as I am at the moment. And don't tell anybody, and no one will know it's Vanity Publishing. Between us.
We would have been pretty similar in that regard as well, just in terms of the company setup. Like when we were applying for Arts Council funding for shows, you needed to have a company bank account in order to get your Arts Council funding. And so to get a company bank account, you had to register as a company. And that's the only reason we did any of that stuff. And yeah, that was it. As Aonghus said, otherwise it's a name on a poster. It's, you know, getting the money together to do a nice website for yourself, and off to the races.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful to kind of demystify that, because I think the title for this webinar of, like, you know, portfolio careers and how to set up a company is a very grandiose way of saying, right, here's the hustle.
Yeah,
that's it.
Here's what's involved.
And I think that's key. The only thing I will say in this, because the way I'm talking this, it sounds like it's very much a handshake deal here and we're all mates here and it's all very informal. what I would encourage anyone to do, even if, and particularly if you're making a show with your very best friend or your partner or whoever, get everything on paper in advance and agreed. Because, you know, in 99 out of 100 shows that you might make, it'll just be the show that does 10 days at the Fringe and disappears and wasn't that great. But you might make Riverdance, or you might make Disco Pigs, or you might do something. And so to protect yourself in advance, in case someone's optioning film rights, or in case there's a London transfer and do we recast it or do we not, get those things down on paper, because it's really easy to agree them when you're mates. It is much more tricky to agree them when there's 60 grand on the table or 20 grand on the table or the opportunity to work with on the table. So you know, it's not all hippie, free love, hey, let's just make it happen. Get stuff down on paper too.
Agreed. I believe Theatre Forum, which is another one of the support agencies for Irish theatre, has for their members sample contracts. So if you're not sure what that looks like, membership for them, I think, is not exorbitant, and they can give you support and those kind of things. Yeah, and I think both of you the way you talked about kind of creating this work at these stages in your career was very inspiring. That it was like, I want to do something. I want to make this choice myself. I want to put these stories out in the world. But I think it's also really useful to keep in mind, you know, there's paperwork involved with this, and you need to keep an eye on it. With this kind of creativity where you are the kind of driving force, you need to make sure you're keeping your eyes on the road. All right, I was totally right. I should have ended my section on the what does success look like question. So before I hand it over to ask first our students if they have any questions, Aonghus Óg MacNally, if people wanted to find out more about Rise Productions, where should they seek?
riseproductions.ie, simple as that. Everything there's on the website. We've been putting up quite a bit of content over the last little while. I've been trying to work with the graduating class from American College Dublin. I might have mentioned other training establishments are available.
Other parishes are allowed to be mentioned.
Yes. So I'm trying to give them some kind of a platform, just given obviously the restrictions around the coronavirus deal at the moment, and then trying to break into the business. And we were kind of commissioning some work through the crisis as well to kind of give people, you know, stuff to be focused on and to create content. So yeah, riseproductions.ie, everything is there. The 2 series of the podcast there, which I would highly recommend to any of the graduating class here about to go out into the world. If you're going to go and audition for Lynn Parker and you haven't seen many Rough Magic shows, there's a Lynn Parker episode, there's a Louise Lowe episode, there's an Annie Ryan episode. Give yourself an hour-long cheat sheet to know who the real Tanya Dean is or the real John Morton. And just to give you, it's not bad as a kind of a idiot's guide to, you know, X, Y, or Z within the industry. It's useful to swallow up on. But everything's at riseproductions.ie.
Excellent. And social media?
Oh, it's all Rise Productions and Aonghus MacNally as well. You'll find it. I'm not hard to find.
Like a bad penny.
Yes.
John, for you, if you want to find out more about White Label or about Devious Theatre or just about John Morton, where should they seek?
They all have websites. Devious Theatre is at devioustheatre.com, and White Label is at whitelabel.ie. And then in a useful act of vanity, about 10 years ago, I got my own website, which is johnmorton.ie. And the idea behind that was, again, during struggling actor writing times, I wanted to have kind of like a one shop for all that people could go on to and see what I was working on and get a look at my CV and watch any videos. Like, you know, it basically hosts occasional articles on what I do and my showreel. But it is a very useful thing to have, just in terms of giving people, you know, a quick little kind of like online business card in terms of what you do and a little bit of a portfolio. So I would be a fan of putting a website together for yourself if it's something you'll get the use out of.
I mean, full disclosure, I knew you as a grad and I thought you'd be somebody who'd be interested for this. I looked at your website to see what you'd done. I'm like, yep, portfolio careers. That guy seems great.
Yep, it's all paid off.
Excellent. All right, this is probably a good point for me to pass the mic. The way we've worked this for other webinars is the magic of Zoom means that there is a raise hand function. So if you click on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, a little screen will pick up and there should be a raise hand button. If you can't figure that out, and it took me a while, you can just type raise hand into the chat box. Again, we'd ask our students, they get first priority, but there should be time afterwards. So if you have questions, hold on to them, we'll get to them. So do we have any questions from our TU Dublin students? I should mention as well that TU Dublin staff are also equally welcome to. All right, let's open it right out. Does anyone have any questions about portfolio careers, about setting up a company, about Rise Productions, Devious, White Label, the lovely painting behind Aonghus' head? All right, we have two graduate questions. All right, Seamus McManus, if you want to switch on your microphone and camera and ask your question. Or Sean McManus, I apologize.
Yeah. Hello, my name's Sean. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Tanya, for this wonderful talk. My question was just, well, there was two, but one's very short, and it's just for Tanya, and it was, what was the name of that website that had a sample of contracts?
Oh, absolutely. I'll pop it into the chat as well, but it is theatreforum.ie. And the other great one is irishtheatreinstitute.ie. They are wonderful organizations, and whatever your social media flavor of choice is, follow them on that, because quite often opportunities, bursaries, programs will pop up there, and it's a great way to kind of keep abreast of what's going on in terms of supports.
Cool, great, thank you very much.
You're
and
welcome.
just for the pair of you guys, you spoke about raising funds through non-bursary means, and I just kind of wanted to delve a little bit further into that, if you could. Just like what kind of ways do you go about that?
Like I was saying, I think, to be honest, like a lot of it is kind of the stuff that I started off doing, if that doesn't sound too depressing at all. But we put on a show last year in Smock Alley called The Roaring Banshees, which we raised, I think, in order to put on the show, I think we raised something like maybe about $7,000 to put it on. And we really pushed it, and we had great support from Smock, and it ended up becoming, I think it was the biggest selling new play that's been on in Smock. It did really well. Like, the box office was fantastic. We were absolutely delighted with it. But it was made by, we did 2 table quizzes, we did 2 live comedy nights. We got some money from Kilkenny Arts Office, which every local authority where you're from should have usually Arts Act grants or something like that. And then we did 1 or 2 other small fundraisers. So that was, even for someone who's like been doing this like about 14 years, you're still selling raffle tickets. But that cobbled together enough money that was just enough sufficient to put on the play. And then you're phoning in favors. We got rehearsal space from the Arc, which was kindly gifted to us. And that was it, yeah. And we got some help from the Abbey as well with costumes. But yeah, it's a lot of cobbling together. Different favors and funding from different sources in order to make something that looks polished and pristine. But yeah, that's the stark reality of it.
Mm. Okay, great, cool. And was that similar for yourself, Aonghus?
Yeah, I've had different experiences over the years with it. In that, I've done the big funded campaign a couple of years back. It's difficult to go back to that well more than once, though.
Absolutely.
I think it's really difficult because, I heard someone say recently that kind of within the arts community itself, it feels like with all these fundraising campaigns, we're all just passing around the same tenor to each other. So it's tricky to tap that well more than once, but it's a useful thing to do. And if you have networks, social or otherwise, outside of your own arts community, it's really useful. So in the big deciding factor in that funded campaign for me was that I was very involved in the GA, and that network was there to be tapped. And because I had years of, if ever they were doing a race night or a charity night or a fashion night, who are you going to get to host the evening? Sure, Engel does the acting, get him up and he'll do it. And we had done Fight Night, our first show, we had done for free as a fundraiser for the club as well. And so they were keen to row in. But other times there is a method out there. The Rise model as it currently exists is to extensively tour nationally here, which sounds like it should be expensive. And it is if you have the right amount of people on the road. But if, like me, you just decide that you'll do 8 of the jobs, you can still pay your actors really well too well, as it happens. I pay more than anybody else does if it's stupid, but I respect actors, so I keep doing it. So you can make that happen, and off the back of kind of guarantees and box office, you can make a financial model that makes it make sense. I'm not saying it's easy, and you would need to front load stuff, because obviously until that box office comes in, how are you going to cash flow the original outlay of rehearsal space and costumes and actors' fees through rehearsals, whatever else. So usually what I'll do is, I'm fortunate enough that at this stage I have the relationship established with all the regional venues, that if I pick up the phone and say, hey, do you want the next Rise show? In a lot of cases, they're going to say yes, and they'll put money on the table. So once I know that that's coming, it's just a question of cash flow in the early days. And that can be anything from rich corporate donors to the table quizzes to a credit card loan, if you're confident enough that you're going to get it out the far side. It is about the hustle, as Tanya says, about making it work. But another thing, just to come back to, with John talking about websites and stuff, I think this is an important thing to drive home. The difference in the last even 10 years of the democratization of technology has been a game changer. The idea now that on your smartphone in your pocket, you can put together a pretty solid theatre trailer if you wanted to. The idea that you could create an entire podcast from your mobile phone. The idea that there's, even graphic design packages that you could be making good posters. So there's a lot that you can do yourself for very little, to find ways to make it happen. And indeed, in terms of advertising stuff as well, creating audio content or video content for those social media channels, that's stuff that wasn't available to people 15, 20 years ago that is now. And so I think it's good to raise the money and get the call in those favors and do the things you do that way, but also look at what you can do that doesn't cost money and not just cost time, and look at those avenues as well.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you
for the question, Sean. We have another question from another graduate, Mark O'Reilly. If you want to stick on your microphone and camera and make yourself known.
Hello, guys. Thank you very much for this. This is great. So my question is, because I just graduated last year and straight out, very much kind of the same, wanted to make my own company and did. What I want to know from both of you is if you had one piece of advice. Okay, so obvious things aside, things that you've already touched on, or maybe a better way to phrase it, what's one thing you wish you knew back when you started your companies that you wish somebody said to you that you could have, you could have known this 10 years ago? And that's what I'm curious about.
I guess, this is a slightly contentious answer. I guess I wish I had a better idea of what the summit of the mountain looked like, if I'm being perfectly honest about it. I thought that if you do certain things and you play by the rules, you're going to get to a point where you'll be a company that has kind of regular funding. Now, a lot of that, as Ingo alluded to, is, there was a crash of economy and so many companies got eviscerated. But I think, I wish I actually had a more realistic and pragmatic idea of what it was actually like, that you don't necessarily, some people do, but most people don't go through this hierarchy of you put on your first show and you put your second show, and 4 shows in you're doing your fringe show, and then 2 shows later you're doing your DTF show, and then your company's in the Abbey. And that is not the case. Even when I was kind of shocked after a while, because I was a real, and I still am a massive theatre nerd. I used to get the Irish Theatre Handbook and I would assimilate it, and I would know every company in every town, back when there was companies in every town. And I just thought there was this, massive thriving landscape of theatre. And then you kind of realize it's actually quite under-resourced. There's not a lot of opportunities. And I think as a company, I wish I had, I'd been more aware of that, because I think then you could focus a lot more then on what it is you want to get from it, what it is that makes your company necessarily special, where your audience is, and not worry about the careerist aspect of it, because as we've alluded to many times, it's very, very difficult to have a career. So that's the stuff I wish I knew. I wish I better understood the overall landscape.
Okay, Thank you.
I'm gonna cheat and say two things. One is don't underestimate how willing the entire industry is to help. If you go and ask for advice, ask for supports, ask for anything, you'll be amazed at the people who you think are way too important to give you the time to have a cup of coffee with you, that'll come and have a cup of coffee with you. So I would say never be afraid to ask. And then the second thing, and this is kind of even more important, I discovered just before we set up Rise, I had a whole heap of friends who were getting TV series greenlit, or were winning awards internationally, or were bringing in to do stuff at the Abbey or whatever. And I had no friends with a manuscript in a drawer going, I just can't get anybody to look at it. And it was at that point that I realized that the punk rock DIY ethos of just make it happen was so vital, because the difference that I saw between the people who were making it and the people who weren't making it wasn't that the work was particularly better, it's that the work existed. The simple act of doing it propelled you to the next level. And so don't second guess yourself. Don't go, oh, but I'm not good enough yet, or I want to write, but I can't write as well as Marco Rowe or Emo, like whatever. Just do it. Grab it by the scruff of the neck, by hook or by crook, go and do it. I mean, going back to the podcast days, there's interviews with Declan Conlon about staging Iraqi gold heists. There's Aidan Kelly talking about stripping copper piping out of convents that they were rehearsing in to sell for scrap to bankroll the show. I'm not suggesting that we edge towards criminality. Just disclaimer there for Dr. Dean. But I'm just saying it has happened in the past and it made the shows happen. By hook or by crook, get it done. That's the difference. Just make it happen.
Yeah, just to add to that, something that dovetails Ingo's point with my initial point. Like, our mantra very early on when we were making theatre was, be the band you want to hear, and to realize what it is about yourself and your background and the style of work that you're into that's unique. And I think what I was talking about in terms of the landscape as well, like a big part of that was, there was definitely a point where we'd had a really good run for a couple of years, and we found that we were starting to make work that was geared towards the work that is popular in the industry. We had a couple of years there where you're kind of doing that, and you're lulled into this false sense of security because you're going, well, this is the thing that I do now, because that's that's what will mean we'll get a DTF show, or we'll get to play in this venue, or we'll get to play at this festival. And that's a really skewed way of thinking. And once we kind of caught ourselves with that, we snapped back out of it and realized that really the actual initial instincts and urges of what we wanted to do and the type of work we wanted to make were completely valid. And we were right to follow them in the first place. And to keep that at the heart of everything that you're doing is really important.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. That's very thorough.
Thank you so much, Mark. I would like to note for the recording that TU Dublin Conservatoire does not condone the stripping of copper from convents for any reason, even for putting on a show. All right, we have another hand up from a graduate, Grace Collender. If you want to stick on your microphone and camera or type your question, whatever works best for you.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Grace.
Hi. So my question is, I suppose, I feel very worried at the moment as an artist, considering the lack of funding that you've spoken about, and I suppose just that our work isn't being taken as seriously as it should be. I know for one, like me, without theatre and films growing up, I definitely would not be the person that I am today. So I obviously, like everyone else, feel like it's really, really important. And I other than tweeting Joseph Madigan only for her not to reply, I feel so helpless and heartbroken. And I just wonder if you have any advice as to how we combat as a community this lack of, like, it feels like lack of understanding of that what we do is important. That I've seen lots of people say, like, we're not going to fund your dreams of being an actor and all this stuff, and it's just like, what? You know what I mean? I just wonder if you had any advice that is about how we're going to combat this mess.
I'm going to kind of split this answer just a little bit, because I know a lot of the stuff that we've been focusing on is theatre related.
Yeah.
And to that, I don't really have, I don't really know, and it is something that's massively worrying and fraught with uncertainty. I can say from the perspective of film and TV, being another area that I'm working in, that does seem to be a little bit more positive. And I think I think potentially I think potentially we're maybe going to be, all things going well, and obviously production's been able to get back on track next month, which is the plan. But I think, you know, we're looking into a potential bit of a crest of a wave. I think a bit of a golden period for Irish film and TV. I think the Hulus and the Amazons and the Netflixes are starting to wake up to the stories that are here. I think shows like, you know, Your Normal Peoples and Your Derry Girls have shown that. And I think that if you are an actor or a maker who's sitting at home and really worried and feeling a little bit like there's nothing you can do, use the self-taping kit that you've got at your advantage and start creating some good showreel material for yourself, or try to make little short movies, or little, you know, even like stuff like Dear Ireland, like looking at the quality of some of that stuff where it was kind of merging, almost like merging theatre and film. And I think maybe, you know, see what you can do at home and what you can make right now and do right now that will add to your toolkit. And then I think that you'll be in a good position, you know, going forward. And I think particularly when it comes to film and TV stuff, I think that's going to start motoring a lot quicker than theatre. So, you know, no harm if you've got stuff that's going to help your showreel. And even if it's little bits of writing or whatever, directing that you want to experiment with, I think it's a good time to do it.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, the strength of the film industry, mercifully at the moment, they've got really powerful advocates fighting their corner, which I would argue is not to the same degree in theatre. So what it means is, as John says, they're waking up to the fact that we are still this incredible island of storytellers, but an island of storytellers with very lucrative tax breaks to attract production companies in. That's a great combination of factors, which means that, you know, and we're talking about, you know, new studios coming on stream soon as well. So hopefully that will kick in and that will be a help for the industry. In terms of the theatre end of things, sorry, one of the things John was talking about, kind of make stuff happen yourself. I was talking about the democratization of technology. If you have the capacity to be on this Zoom call, you more than likely have the capacity to create your own audio drama at home. You more than likely have the capacity to make a short film. There's enough simple free software out there in terms of editing, both for both sound and camera, that you could probably start to put something together. And even if it doesn't have to be Citizen Kane first time out, for you to start to put it together, even just to feel that you're creating something might help. But you'll start to learn stuff. And maybe if the first thing isn't perfect, the third one will be, and you can then choose to put it out. In terms of the reality of theatre, I don't think there's any point in trying to say, hey, it'll all be grand, because we are in the middle of a once-in-a-century global pandemic. To try and suggest otherwise doesn't seem to make sense to me. So let's embrace that for the reality that it is. Okay, and go, look, that is what it is, and all the willing in the world ain't going to change that. So it's going to be tough, and it's going to be tough for a while maybe, right? That's just the reality. However, hold fast, because for millennia, theatre has endured, because going back even before the Greeks to the shaman up on the mountaintop, human beings, for whatever reason, have an innate need to come together as a group to tell stories. It's how we rationalize and make sense of this world. And there is still a hunger for it amongst audiences. So even if it takes, as long as it takes, and look, I'm putting a tour together for next year, there are some theatres who won't speak to me about anything before October of 2021. Okay? That's obviously the extreme conservative end of things. But there are some people out there that go, you know, it could come through then until we get a vaccine, and we're not doing anything until then. Even if it takes that long, we can find a way to survive for now. Bunker down, protect, polish, hone the skills that are there, and be ready to come back and explode onto the scene, grab it by the scruff of the neck, wrestle it to the ground and make it your own, because the hunger will be there for audiences. I promise.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's so valid. Like, I think that like so much of being an actor is like in your first couple of years, particularly, is trying to condition yourself to that fact that you always need to be ready. You always need to be ready for the self tape. You need to be a little bit physically limber. Your voice needs to be in good shape. And this is a really, really good time to actually be able to do all that stuff. And again, obviously, as Aonghus said, like it is a pandemic. Like it's not like this, you know, people shouldn't have this pressure of getting up every morning and feeling like they need to make these absolutely masterful films or anything. But I think look at the things you can do, how it's going to help your toolkit, and yeah, be ready for when it all comes back around, because it absolutely will.
Cool.
A great question. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks so much, guys.
And just to tack on to that as well, if you're interested in kind of thinking in terms of political advocacy about how to kind of raise public awareness of the arts, if you're not already, follow National Campaign for the Arts, ncfa.ie. They're very passionately and politically savvily advocating on this exact issue about kind of creating political will and support towards the arts, and on creating a kind of structured plan for not just survival, but kind of development of the arts as being integral to Irish society. And that's my political plug done. Okay, we have another question. Muireann Lyons, graduate, if you want to stick on your camera and your microphone and ask your question.
Hi. Thanks for all this is great. I have two questions. One, I suppose, kind of building on Grace's. If we're to be ready for when this kind of finally ends and the theatres can finally come back, how can we upskill in these positions that I suppose, like stage management, producing, lighting design, things that really require hands-on experience that I suppose a lot of young actors won't get access to, with things such as like Seen and Heard probably being affected this year, where people kind of jumping into random positions that they might not have expected before. Is there ways of building on these skills at home in lockdown, or do you have any recommendations on how to research them or where to kind of go?
In terms of things you can do, I think, like, to be honest about it, like stuff like YouTube, and it's a good resource. I think if you, in the broadest way possible, I think if there's a particular area that you're interested in, you're looking at upskilling in, these things can be found. I think it's just a case of using the tools that you have, like read the articles, read the books that are online, and then in other ways as well, maybe try and curate some of your. I think I do when I'm writing is usually, like, if I'm writing something, because I know I'm not going to have like a ton of time, because life gets in the way and everything else. I'm not maybe necessarily going to have a ton of time to do a load of research and assimilate and watch all the things that I should probably be doing. So what I like to do is gravitate my recreational reading time or my recreational watching time. Like if you sit down in the evening and you're going to watch 2 episodes of something, make that about the thing that maybe you're working on, and see how that bleeds in a little bit. So I think, you know, if you can kind of do that, if you can find, even if it's in a very like slightly obtuse way from the area, I think find the recreational stuff you can do, the books you might be able to read, the articles that are online, the things that are on Netflix or YouTube that kind of show a different facet of that area. Podcasts as well are invaluable in that regard, because there's a lot of stuff out there. Like I think you can cobble together a nice kind of like self-made course for anything really at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things that's come up recently in terms of the support schemes for theatre people and stuff, in that, you know, for a writer to ask for a bursary to spend 3 months writing in the room is a feasible thing. For a theatre director, you know, as long as you social distance, how do you get a bursary to kind of put stuff together? Like, so I think you're right to point out that, you know, the chance to play around with a lighting rig or directing a scene is tricky at the moment. So there's no point pretending it's not. So the answer then is ask yourself honestly, those things that you say, no, I know I really should do those and it would improve my career, but I just never have the time. Well, now you do. So be strict with yourself on it. You know, if you feel like you don't read enough plays, now might be a time to start reading plays. Or if you feel like you do read enough, but in terms of what's going on in the UK, the new kind of, say, maybe more ethnically diverse voices coming from the UK telling new British stories. Let's have a look at those rather than reading Carol Churchill again. Or let's look at what's at the cutting edge of American work. Say, other countries, even Australia, there's a lot of great stuff happening in Australia. So those other English language speaking countries where you maybe go, wow, I found this incredible two-hander that, got a fringe first in Edinburgh 3 years ago. No one's done it here. Why don't we go and do it? So those kind of things, find the things that you can do by yourself. Admitting that there are things, our art form is a collaborative art form. There will be limitations. But rather than go, oh, there's limitations, I can't do anything, go, sure, there's limitations, but what actually can I do? And if it is as simple as giving yourself the discipline of, I'm just going to do 25 minutes every day of a physical and vocal warm-up, just so I keep those muscles as they are. I stay in touch with who I am. Or as John says, there's a whole load of acting masterclasses that you can access on YouTube and stuff. Some of them you want to throw out the window and go, I'd never sign up to any of that. But some of them you might go, oh, that's a little nugget of something. That's a kernel of something. So rather than make excuses for the reasons you can't do those things, find the excuses to do the things you can.
Great. My second question is then on getting into voice work. How to get into voice work, building a voice reel at home, and then what to do with the reel once you've made it.
Yeah, look, the voiceover work is incredibly lucrative. It's a godsend in terms of maintaining viability in a career like this. You certainly can do it yourself at home. It's as simple as, certainly when I did it, it was long enough ago that it was a case of like taping the radio on a cassette player to transcribe the scripts from the ads, and then just go to record them. Now, yes, you can do it at home. But I think if you have access to a couple of £100, I would wholeheartedly recommend approaching one of the studios and saying, look, I want to get a voice reel together. It's going to cost you a couple of £100, right? And that's a lot of money, particularly at the moment when we don't have other sources of income coming in, maybe. But the thing to remember is if you drop 250, 300, 350 quid on a voice demo, if you get 1 gig out of that, one radio ad is going to pay for it and make a profit. So you only need to get lucky once off the back of it. Plus, you'll have been in one of the studios. You get a feel of how the studios work around town. The engineers who do it with you will recommend you for a job when they come in next week and go, we need a young female voice. I'm sick of all the usual suspects. Is there anyone who's good and new? And they go, funnily enough, last week in here, have a listen. And suddenly it can spark off that way. It's one of those ones for me where, I've had occasions where I'd be doing a show, an 8-week contract in the theatre. I had one morning off, went and did a voiceover for 45 minutes and earned more in the 45 minutes of the voiceover than I did in the 8-week contract for the theatre play. So if you can find a way to crack into it, it buys you an awful lot of freedom. There's no great secret to it. It's not there's no magic to it. I would say, go on VoiceBank's website, listen to other people's demos, see what's out there, see what's working for people who you go, oh, I recognize his voice or I recognize her voice, and because there's cadences and rhythms and it's quite formulaic a lot of the time. I don't pretend it was really complicated. It ain't. But I think have a listen to that, and then if you can get the few £100 together, I think it would be a very smart investment to go and see about getting a professional one done at one of the studios in town.
Is there a list of these studios in town?
There probably isn't, but I'll throw them in. Will I throw them in the chat, Tanya? Or
that's perfect.
I'll throw them in the chat. That's what I'll do.
Yeah. And we do need to move on to the questions. So thank you so much, Warren.
Thanks.
All right. Alex Bailey has a question, another grad. Alex, you want to stick on your microphone and camera?
Hello. Thank you so much. I was actually going to ask you a different question, but it's quite similar to what Grace and Myrn asked. So instead, I'd like to hear your take on, I suppose, whether or not you think people who are in the industry at the moment, people who run theatre companies or who are like multi-talented performers, producers, directors, such as yourselves, have an obligation, have a role in times where there's political upheaval like there is right now, in times where there's, horrible things happening that we see on the news every day, or just in the world in general, what can people do as artists? Is it a case where we should depict exactly what's going on? Are people looking for escapism? Are people looking for, what would be your take on that?
I would, well, first and foremost, I think it's always important to listen, because I think great art comes from, great art comes from that process of listening, to being engaged with what's going on, to being aware of what's going on, and seeing how you can assimilate that. One of the things that came up really, really early, which I saw so many times in different permutations going around, like Twitter and Instagram, was that like nobody wants, like next year for like, Fringe 2021 or whatever, nobody wants to see a load of pandemic plays. And I think that is absolutely valid. I think sometimes things can just be too on the nose and close to the bone. And I think one thing that the last couple of months have proven is that there is a real need for healthy escapism, and not stuff that's mindless or entertainment for entertainment's sake either. I mean, it is important to make stuff that speaks to the world that we're in and what's going on. But I guess it's how you wrap it up, and I guess it's how you present it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I'd always be a fan of finding the art in it. So rather than, as John says, rather than an accurate depiction of exactly what went on, how do you abstract that and talk about those themes in an artistically engaging way? The one thing I will say about all this, though, and you're right, look, it's a turbulent time, but there is a common denominator in any right-wing or authoritarian regime always comes after the arts first. And the reason they do that is because the arts can't function without empathy. Unless you can sit in the audience and look at that character on stage and go, wow, I may not be a woman in her 70s, but I can really feel for her and what she's going through. And so the arts foster empathy. And as long as you foster empathy in a society, it makes it really hard to say, hey, your problem's because of that brown person over there, or your problem's because of that working class person over there. You start to go, hang on a second, we're all humans and in this together. And so I think that's the thing to hold on to continue to strive to foster empathy, to engage with the human condition. And that doesn't mean everything has to be happy clappy and they all live happily ever after, but just speak to the humanity, find the truth in it. And I think as long as that's coming from an honest place, I think that'll do a lot of the job for you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Good question. Thank you, Alex. Next up with their hands up, we have one Brian Brennan. Brian, do you want to stick on your camera and microphone and ask your question?
Hi guys, thanks. I'm actually slightly different. I'm coming from the Gaiety school. We were sent an invite link to this, so it's very interesting to sit here and listen to everything you've discussed. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome here.
I just kind of had a question, I suppose. I'm coming from a slightly different route, for lack of a better word. So I currently work as a personal trainer and a digital marketer. I'm considering changing into the arts as a career. So it's not the same thing as, I suppose, going out. It kind of, John touched on earlier about balancing part-time work when you graduate. So I have yet to be, I'm being very positive here about being accepted now once I hear back from the Gaiety for full-time, and then going on and balancing work. So I'm quite lucky to be in a position where I have something that can fund me if I am to work part-time and that. But I just wanted to know how you kind of found balancing the part-time work with, say, a job popping up was my first question. So like if you're short notice period, we need you next week, and rosters are done maybe.
It's not easy, and I think you're probably. I always use the phrase stabilizers, but I think in the first kind of the first year or two or whatever of going through that process, it is going to be a little bit difficult, and it can be very difficult in training as well. I guess it's like, as much as possible, what you're constantly trying to do, and what you're always trying to do, is find a way that works for you, and you're slowly but surely trying to get a little bit more control over that in as much as you can. And sometimes it isn't going to work out. Like, I mean, I remember working jobs that I couldn't get time off for theatre gigs when I wanted them, and it's awkward, and it's it's not ideal. But I definitely would, when it comes to the theatre side or the film side or the acting side, like whatever artistic side that you're coming from, I think that's the one that you should always, I'm not saying prioritize, but I think like make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to affect your professionalism, that's not going to reflect on your dependability and stuff like that, because there is a degree of begetting work, particularly when you get into it. So you're constantly trying to find a balancing act between it. And I think just as you're doing it, try and curate it as much as possible for yourself and create the time. Sacrifices are always going to have to be made. So it's what you're sacrificing and how that then becomes, that creates the space for something else, whether it's particularly like upskilling in a certain area, or if it's the rehearsals or the read-throughs you need to be doing, or and if you are in a position where you've got a couple of different strings on your bow, which tends to be the case, like you'll find that's probably going to be of help to the career as well. Like you're going to have different perspectives and different you're going to have different perspectives that are going to help facilitate that, and I think hopefully like underline it. So after a while, you kind of, as you become a little bit more confident and on your feet in terms of the industry, you'll be able to navigate it a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is just to face into reality that it's tough. And I have worked 22-hour days. I have worked 7-day weeks. There needs to be a degree of hunger as well, at some point in terms of, how bad do you want it? In practical terms, I think it's probably easy for you to juggle the digital marketing stuff in terms of what workload you take on or not. In terms of, you can kind of turn on and turn off the flow of that to some extent in terms of gigs you accept. Otherwise, in terms of the PT stuff, that's going to be trickier if you need to be teaching a spin class every Monday at whatever time, or if you've got a personal client who, she can only do Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or whatever, that's going to be a trickier one for you. And so ultimately then what it comes down to is taking the leap and backing yourself and going, do you know what, even if this means dropping the income down by 20 or 30 or 35%, I can do the beans on toast thing for 2 years at the Gaiety, on the basis that when I get out the far side of this, I'll be doing what I really want to do. And also, the other thing I will say is there are figures within the industry who have a skill set outside of just what we do, and they become invaluable. So, like, for example, Peter Daly, who's an exceptional actor, is also everyone's accountant. Everyone in Irish theatre goes to Peter Daly. And so you could well get a situation where you corner the market in, listen, I'm after getting 5 days on Vikings, I'm not in shape. Can you give me a 10-day crash course or whatever that you could become the go-to PT guy or whatever? So there's avenues that would open up, but it may well take, taking the leap in the first place and going, right, I'll tough it out for a little while. I don't mind a little bit of hardship in the early days to kind of separate the men from the boys, the wheat from the chaff, whatever. You want people to be able to still feed themselves and put a roof over their head, but a little bit of adversity like that might do you no harm in terms of the hunger for making it work when you get to the far side.
Yeah, like that's I can't stress enough how true that is. Like you have to get very comfortable. You do have to get very comfortable with the potential poverty and the things you're going to miss out on, and the fact that in some cases you might have to eat shit for a couple of years, and you just gotta
not literally,
but there is a degree of, like, particularly in times of hardship, and that's another thing that's worth mentioning. Like, as Aonghus mentioned earlier, and we've touched on, like, we were in positions where our careers in our like mid-20s or so we're starting to get going, and then a recession hit, and now we're back looking into a situation where a recession is going to hit. So the specific skills that you have are going to be massively useful to you, and then if you marry them to a really good work ethic, which you're going to need, and like Aonghus said, like the hardships that people will potentially be facing as artists in the next year or two, the people who can weather that, who are adaptable, who have the hunger, I think that's what's that's what's going to see certain people through, and the people who aren't cut out for that they're going to fall by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yeah, great. And just another kind of lead on question to that, and it's funny you're saying that about working hard, like, because I've done the past, say, 2 years of part-time evening course just to get a taste and say I'm not diving straight into the full-time program. I'm trying to see, is it what I want? Is it interesting? So I've done extra work in that. And I remember doing one thing back, I think it was January or February this year, and I'd worked from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the gym, and then I drove to Kildare and I was on set until 3 a.m. and I got back to Dublin at 4 a.m. and I was back in work at 7 a.m. on Saturday, and I'm pretty sure I nearly had an emotional breakdown later that day with lack of sleep. But
yeah, understandably so. Like, there are days and there are times when those things will happen, and particularly if you're trying to juggle multiple gigs, it is gonna happen. So you got to be cut out for that as well. The one thing in that aspect as well that I would, as a piece of advice to people, is like, don't fall into the glorification of busy. That is equally as unhealthy. And I know that from experience. I did it myself for a while, particularly at a point where you're kind of hungry and you're nowhere near the career that you want to have yet. So you start busying yourself and you start finding, like, there can be such a thing as taking on too many projects and creating too many projects and things for yourself, because you want to feel like you're busy. You want to be able to turn around to your friends, your family, or whatever, say, oh, I'm working on this, and I'm working on this, and I'm working on this, and I'm working on this. And that can all, and it's admirable, and there's a good degree of that you probably should and need to be doing, but don't let it get in the way of a healthy and decent work-life balance. Don't like glorify busy to the point where you are completely overworked and completely stressed out and still broke for long periods of time. Like, find a balance within that.
Yeah, don't be a busy fool.
Don't be a busy fool. Yeah.
What you said, Aonghus, as well about the
Brian?
Sorry.
I am actually going to have to cut you off. We've got one more person who's had their hand up for ages and we're coming to the end. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off there. But thank you so much for your question. The last person with their hand waiting very patiently is Dan. Dan, if you want to stick on your camera and your microphone and ask your question.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Tanya. Hi, John.
Hi, Dan. One of our third year students.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this very informative session. And I have a question. Well, it's more of a curiosity for Aonghus. I know you've directed Mad Forest, and it's about the Romanian Revolution. I'm from Romania, and I lived through that revolution. I was 17 at the time. Wow. And I'm curious, what made you choose that play? And it was a great pleasure to watch it. I loved it. But it was kind of a surreal experience to see that thing in Dublin.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the honest truth. When I myself was graduating drama school, Annabelle Cummin came and directed that show with me in the cast. So that was where I was first introduced to it. It's a play that was written for the graduating class of Central over in London. And so I was directing for the American College Dublin, and I went, okay, I need a play for this graduating class. And so you want something that's going to showcase people with different kinds of roles, a broad spread across genders and whatever else you want. How do you get enough to keep enough of them occupied? And I just went, well, look, this is a play that's written specifically for a graduating class. It was the 30th anniversary of the as well. And I thought, this feels like a great play. And also, Carol Churchill is, arguably the greatest living playwright in the English language. So you're giving these graduating students a fantastic platform to show what they can do. So it ticked a lot of the boxes for me. It's also a cracking play, I think. I watched the production of it the other night via Zoom, actually, from America, where they had put it together, an entire production on Zoom, which is remarkable. But yeah, that was the rationale behind choosing it.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That's all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Dan. All right. I think that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much to John, to Aonghus, for your time, for giving so selflessly and openly of your own careers. And I think for managing to strike a tone that was a healthy balance of realist and positive, which I think we all kind of need right now. Next week in the Career Stages webinar, it's our last webinar, and we are welcoming Claire Monnelly, who's going to be talking about balancing a career on screen and on stage. So we hope some of you will join us for that. And what we've done for the last few of these webinars is to say thank you to the masterclass leaders, because it's a strange thing to do this on Zoom and not be able to have the applause in the room. So anyone who'd like to, I invite you to turn on your camera. And we're going to give a round of applause using Irish Sign Language for our amazing panelists. Thank you guys so much for your time. This was fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, gang. That was great.
All right, folks, stay well, stay safe, wash your hands, and I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you next week. Thanks, guys. Thanks, John. Thank you, Aonghus.
Thanks, Neil.
Well, thanks very much.
All right.